As described in earlier detail, is the destabilizing legacy of colonialism on modern-day Africa. So, in short, the government of many African countries face civil unrest due to colonial actions. This makes government in the modern countries difficult, to say the least. The instability causes problems in accessing education and ensuring all Africans have medicine and have the food that they need. So the notes that you're going to be taking, we're going to be analyzing how government instability in Africa impacts the standard of living. So let's go with your essential question is, how does government instability in Africa impact the standard of living? And you should be able to describe access to education, distribution of medicine, food to combat diseases and famine, and we'll talk about a few other issues as well. Obviously, we know the standard of living is low for most of Africans. There are many major issues that affect the quality of life. Unstable governments, access to education, lack of health care, and threat of famine. In some African countries with more stability, educational opportunities are more accessible and of higher quality. Governments with instability are less likely to address the control and treatment of diseases, less likely to worry about education. If a country is experiencing civil war, going to school becomes a dangerous act, as the journey or school itself may be unsafe. And this is the situation in several areas like the Sudan and South Sudan. Here are some key issues. When a government is unstable, it cannot meet the needs of its people. So here we find the bigger issue. As you can see in this one, there's the unsafety. It's not like you can walk through the streets to go to school if this is the way your town looks, your city looks. So here you go about the access to education. And when they do get an education, it's of a very different sort than ours. Rural areas, so country areas, shortage of money, teachers, and school buildings, so they only send some students to school or just for a little while to learn some of the basics. A lot of children have to do chores. Here's another example of a country school. And as you can see, although they're all fairly young, they are of different ages in that classroom. Here we have a gender gap because some African societies believe that girls do not need an education and should be prepared for marriage. So oftentimes you see only or mostly males in school, young boys. Another issue with unstable governments is diseases. Countries with government instability are also less likely to address the control and treatment of diseases. Unstable governments can't properly fund treatments or create campaigns to educate citizens about treatment and prevention. Underfunded healthcare systems have led to the rampant spread of HIV and AIDS across the continent. There are Ebola breakouts. Some of these highest rates of diseases are in Africa. Botswana, which has been stable since independence, was able to respond to this epidemic quickly, ensuring the lowest infection rates. So if there are issues and you're stable, you can take care of it. And once again, see the malaria is back. not a pretty version of what happens when diseases are able to run out of control. Here are some details on the deaths of HIV and AIDS in Africa. And here is a map showing the percentages. And now, granted, this was about 8 years ago. Most hasn't gotten better at this point. Okay. So now we know education is an issue. We know disease is an issue. Here they're talking about Zimbabwe, what has one of the highest rates of HIV and AIDS, has a very poor economy, which means medicines, they can't afford medicines. If a country is unstable and there is unrest and there is no health care and there is no work, then there are no jobs for money, which then can pay for medicines or insurance, like that. Okay. And here they're talking about Botswana. So you need to make sure you know the differences between the countries. And here's some education. And then another huge issue is famine. And famine is when there's not enough food in a country to feed your country. Government instability can lead to these food shortages. Famine in Africa, though, can have a variety of natural causes from climate change. We know there's drought. We know there's desertification. However, often government instability can create the problem with the food supply. So if there's military conflict that disrupts or destroys farming, that is a problem. It can also interrupt trade when there's civil war. So here's some information about the lack of food. Other governments have used food as a weapon, as you can see down here, denying food shipments to its political enemies. So already they're unstable. Already their countries might be going through civil war. And then the people who are in power are using food as a weapon and not letting people eat. So essentially starving people to hopefully stop the war. Okay. Oops, sorry. Sorry, a little glitch there. In democracies, which they are all sort of potentially democracies here in Africa, the people have the ultimate political authority to choose their leaders. However, when there isn't a lot of political freedom and they don't have civil liberties and they don't have work and they can't go to school and they don't have enough food to eat and they're dying of diseases, it becomes a real issue. One of the countries that generally tends to hold free and fair elections and respect their outcomes is South Africa. But there is the dominance of the African National Congress, which we know was led by Nelson Mandela for years, that there really is a lack of an effective opposition, which has led to a little bit of corruption as well, which means it's not quite as stable as it should be. So these are just the things to think about with government instability, how they can't take care of their people who are the most important part, really, of the country. I know I went a little backwards and showed you that map again, just to tie it up. But remember, when you're doing your Cornell notes, our topic is the 3 issues in Africa, and our essential question is, how does this impact the standard of living, government instability, and look at our 3 topics, and you should know the countries that have the most progress and the least progress. All right, wrapping it up.